nice to be allowed to give this talk about something that I had no idea that existed before I started being involved in the Ferrite community. Maybe a bit thanks to Dennis, who likes super strange stuff in Finite elements and then discussions. And to me, working with this was really realizing how valuable it is as at that time postdoc, but I think also I kind of missed it as a PhD student to have a community where you can discuss things that most other people are not interested in, and where people actually understand and you can actually exchange ideas. I think that's really valuable, and actually that's part of why I now in my new role think it's so important to keep Ferrite, because having a community around you is really a way to learn a lot more than you can if you're just sitting in an isolated office. So far I have no experience with doing research with these things. I'm not super deep into the theory, so there are probably some here that knows it better than me, but at least the tests are passing. So I'm quite confident that it's correct what is merged. So I promised a talk about what, why, and how is this vector or true vector interpolation. So the first is what are they, and why could these be useful, and how are they implemented in Ferrite? And then I'll circle around and talk about what about the boundary conditions for these. That's not trivial. And then why are these implemented in Ferrite? That's a little story. And how should you use them? So to start with, we have to think what is actually the interpolations we had before. What are those? The vectorized interpolation that you saw Kim showed here for the linear elasticity, you raise to a power, then you vectorize a scalar interpolation. And essentially that's just taking a scalar interpolation and reusing it at the different components of a vector. So it's all built on that basic concept. And of course, then you get these vectors that if you pick out one shape function that's aligned with a coordinate system, and it's typically then associated with what I here call an algebraic node. So just to separate, an algebraic node is not necessarily a geometrical node. That's because we allow different geometric and function interpolation. So you can have linear geometry, but quadratic interpolations, for example. And the important here is they, of course, inherit a lot of the function properties from the base interpolation. Means if you have a discontinuous base interpolation that's scalar, it's also a discontinuous vector interpolation you get. If it's a continuous C0, you get C0 on these, and so on. So what is then the difference if I go to a true vector interpolation? First of all, we write now the shape functions are defined as vectors from the start. So there is no scalar interpolation we start with. This is a so-called HDiv type of interpolation. What's special here is now suddenly the shape functions are aligned with the reference cell in the mesh. So if you rotate the cell, we kind of rotate the DOFs. And we now don't associate them with a node. In this case, they're associated with faces or facets in this specific case. So edges or faces. And what the key is, they will now actually allow continuity to be defined as continuous in the normal direction, for example, over a boundary, but not in the tangential direction. So we can have kind of this partial type of continuity. Here, so we have two types. We have the HDiv, that's Ravialto is one example. There we have normal continuity, and then we have Nedelec, which has the H curl. They have the tangent continuity. That's two different types of continuity, as you can see. So that's a bit what these are. I'll circle back to that and how that works. But to give a why, I want to do a very simple thing. I want to start with heat equation. But what I'm interested in is looking at the flux in a domain where we have two distinct heat conductivities. So we have in the blue domain, we have a higher conductivity than the red domain. And then we solve this problem. You've all seen the code for that, so there's no change. That's standard Lagrange interpolations. But now we would like to visualize the flux. And what we can do, we have this L2 projector that was mentioned. So that's essentially taking the flux, which we, for the heat equation, would calculate in the quadrature points, and then we project it onto a finite element grid. And we do that by minimizing the error, the L2 error, you could say, between these quadrature points and what is possible with interpolation. And that's where we can now use different interpolations for this problem. The challenge, show everything here, so let's just show everything, happens that if we now would do the standard approach that I would do before I knew about this, was say, okay, I'm going to do L2 projection. I take my standard interpolations I use to solve the problem, I project my heat flux. But the heat is, of course, a vector field, but that doesn't matter for the L2 projector. What you see here is for this problem, we get some very strange behavior on the left side across the boundary. This is the horizontal flux. So somehow we get artifacts close to this boundary. What we expect, since we have different heat conductivities above and below the line, is that there is a discrete jump because we have a continuous temperature field. So of course, okay, it's discontinuous. Let's use the discontinuous interpolations then, because that's what we want. Well, then we actually can see here that we get some discontinuities along the x direction. So that means that there is flux coming into a line that is not exiting that line. So actually, we're not fulfilling the balance in the plots we're making. But if we now use this HDiv, what they have is that they guarantee that it's continuous in the normal across an element, which is exactly what you expect from the flux. Because the flux should be conserved. What comes in on one side of the line goes out on the other. There's no volume, so it cannot divert to the side. So that's one kind of surprising usage of this, is actually post-processing. Okay, so how to do this? Well, for nodal interpolations, we teach this in the basic courses, that you say one base function is 1 at one node and 0 at all other nodes, which is fine. That's easy. Below is what it's the equivalent for HDiv interpolations. So that's essentially saying, well, the integral over an edge multiplied with a weight function should be equal to this unique value for each. So that if we have only one here, let's don't look at the formula, that's hard to explain, but we take the integral over the line, we multiply with a constant weight function in this case, then it should only be 1 for that specific shape functions. For all other shape functions, doing that integral over that line should give 0. And that's such that these different shape functions are independent of each other. So okay, means we just have a different rule. Of course, you look up in a table how to interpret, or in papers how to implement these. But that brings up problems. So now we have different, let's say for a linear triangle, we now have 3 edges, so 3 shape functions. And that's fine. But how do we put these into a finite element grid then? Because if we try to put these together, we kind of want that the edge on one element, that degree of freedom also belongs to another element that share the same edge. And we need to make sure that once we've done everything, that we don't get a jump over there. They should be the same. It's the same function. So it was talked about this reinit method earlier today. And for a standard shape functions, our assumption is that the shape function that we implement on the reference element, so the reference coordinates, takes the same value in the reference domain and on the actual grid that we are working with, independent of the size of the element. So that means basically it has a value 1 at the node, and then it gradually goes down to 0 at the other nodes. That means that for the actual shape functions, we don't need to do any mapping. So if you are assembling some code in Ferrite and you're only using the shape values, not the gradients, you actually don't need to re-init your cell values if you're using the standard interpolations. But the moment you need a gradient, you have to do the re-init. For the problem here with the Raviat-Mara interpolation, if you do that, I'll take an assumption, this is how it looks. And we would like, this is the same, like the global shape functions N2, which is very discontinuous. If you look at the arrows, they're not matching across that element border. And this is the same dot. So what you do instead is that you can do the so-called contravariant Piola mapping, where you instead you say that the shape function, the n of x on the spatial domain you're working in, is multiplied with the Jacobian of the transformation divided by the determinant, multiplied with a shape function defined on the reference domain. And of course, that means that updating the grade is even more complicated. That's the reason why we now have third order tensors in tensors, because that's what you get. But if you look, that's actually still not working, right? It's still not continuous across the element, because, well, it goes out from both elements. So in addition to that, we need to also take care that the sign is included when we do the re-init. So we need to know, is this a positive edge or a negative edge? And luckily, we do have a definition of that in the Ferrite. So we can obtain that based on the basically the cell nodes. So based on the numbering of the nodes, if it's going increasing in the edge direction, then it's a positive, and if it's decreasing, it's a negative. And then allows us to say that one of the sides is positive and one is negative, and flip the sign of one. And then we get this behavior that maybe now you say, well, but it's still not continuous here. There's still a jump, true, but there's no jump if you take the normal direction here. And that's the trick, that's what we want. Okay, now I see I'm running quick on time, I guess, but let's see. Exactly, and then we have a similar effect here for the Nedelec element, which has this tangential component. So there were some reasons why the cell values are a bit more complicated now, because now we need to map differently depending on which type of interpolation we have. The good thing is that this also enabled, for example, doing the Hessian. So now you can do map, you can get the second derivative of inside the element, because we already have the infrastructure to do the second, which Elias then implemented using these updated cell values. Okay. Now I thought I was happy. It worked, tests passed, and then I was just doing a quick example. But how do we implement boundary conditions for something that doesn't have nodes? I want to constrain something on the boundary. And usually we just say, well, you just constrain the value at the nodes, and the nodes have a coordinate, and then you apply, you have a function, and you say, what's this function value at this node? And then you prescribe your degree of freedom to that value, and you're happy. But for these things, we don't have a node. We have an edge or a face that we would like to say on this part, we would like to prescribe a function, but that there is no such function. So instead, what we have to do is we have to say, well, actually what we would like to do, we want to minimize the difference between what our interpolations can describe and the function that we would like to have. And I skipped some details in these equations because there's also the normal and tangential component that you only look at. But the key point now, we actually need to solve a finite element problem to get the boundary conditions correct. Luckily, for these, in most cases, except for curl in 3D, these are local to each facet or edge. So that means that we can skip it. and you only solve it on each element by itself. And the main difference is that it looks, instead of the standard Dirichlet where you get the nodal values, here you get some kind of minimized boundary condition that is close to the average value of the prescribed function. Okay, now I have some PRs here. So why does this happen? Well, I wanted to do multiple cell values because I thought it was kind of cool that if you have a multiphysics problem, you don't have to specify the same quadrature rule for every problem. It should only be one, and there's only one geometrical interpolation. But that means I want to reuse my geometric interpolation so that I could generalize the cell values to work with that by splitting up. So let's do that. So then I split the values into geometric and function values, which now makes it complicated. But then before doing that, Fredrik said, by the way, why can't you, how would this turn out if you have these H-div and H-curl elements? Well, I tried again, that's still open. So that's not merged, but the H-div and H-curl are there. Okay, now I realize I'm need to be fast. Some quick example, when can you use this? No details. Mixed problems, for example, you do a dual formulation, you want to solve the constitutive relation in a weak form. That can sometimes used for the heat equation. This is the temperature field, it doesn't look so good. It's discontinuous. But if you look at the formulation, that's exactly what you actually said, that you wanted to solve the temperature where the temperature is actually in the L2 space. So it is discontinuous. Is it correct physics? I don't know. I mean, it's a worse approximation than the standard problem. But on the other hand, if you calculate the flux at the boundary, it's actually in equilibrium, as opposed to if you do that for the standard heat equation problem. Then I took another tutorial with curl elements. Basically, it's analytical comparison. The interesting with this problem is that if you take the Lagrange element and then you run mesh convergence study, it will converge. It flattens out to the wrong value. And that's dangerous. So with a Nedelec, it works. So concluding up or summing up. So what to use it for? If you use it Maxwell equations, it can be interesting. I think Misha did some attempts, but there are other ways, so he didn't use it. Some cases for fluxes, it will be nice for post-processing. But what's next? Well, I mentioned there's something missing for 3D for curl elements. We have tensor value problems. Maybe instead of flux, you have stresses. Then you can do the same here. It's a bit adds more. I got a nice idea now from the talk earlier that since you have the HDF field, maybe you want to add this to IGA, so you can do that there. Nice job. And of course, maybe I can merge the cell multivalues at some point. With that, thank you for your attention.
Okay, we have time for one quick question. Nobody? I have a quick question, actually. So you showed this example for post-processing in the beginning, and I was wondering, is that related to how the grid is now actually aligned with the horizontal direction? Would that be the same if you had an irregular grid on the same problem?
No, you would get the same issues. I must admit the plots wouldn't look as nice for the HDiff. Mm-hmm. Because what you still have is, although you guarantee the normal part, if you, for example, have slanted elements, well, then it's the flux in this direction that is conserved. In the tangential component, it's not conserved, which means it could get discontinuous in the horizontal direction, because the interpolations have no physics in them. So they don't know that there is no boundary there. So admittedly, the best result might have been gotten by actually doing the L2 projection separately on the two fields.